Well, episode 80 of Dragon Ball Super is in the books, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about today. So, let's talk about some Gohan. Now, to start off by talking about this fight between Lavenda and Gohan, I think it's important that I mention this fight took a lot of nods to a lot of previous fights we've seen in the Dragon Ball series. And the first one that came to me would have to be Super Saiyan 4 Goku's fight against Super Android 17. And if you guys remember from this episode of Dragon Ball Super, there was an instance where Gohan was blinded by Lavenda's poison, but he uses his ki as a radar to detect where Lavenda was. So when Lavenda, I guess you could say, disturbs his ki, that helps Gohan identify where he is with his, extra heightened sentence because he's blind now. And if you guys remember back in Dragon Ball GT, when Super Android 17 was fighting against Goku, there was an instance where Goku used the instant transmission and 17 put a blast in his face, and he tells him, hey, I can sense with the vibrations in the atmosphere where you re-enter into the battlefield, and I can use that to kind of detect where you're going to show up so I can blast you. And that was kind of an interesting, similarity to that instance. And the other one I noticed is that when Goku was fighting against Sin Omega Shenron and he was blinded, and Sin pulls off that clock and throws it at him, and Goku catches it and throws it back and starts attacking him. That was kind of similar to this entire episode where we see Gohan kind of fighting while he's blinded. And the third fight that I noticed that it took a reference to was when Goku was fighting against Android 19. And the reason why is, if you guys remember back in Dragon Ball Z, Goku was suffering from the effects of the heart virus, and he went Super Saiyan during the fight, and by going Super Saiyan he accelerated the effects of the heart virus, kind of similar to how Gohan turning Super Saiyan in this fight against Lavenda accelerated, the effects of the actual poison itself. So those are some interesting nods there. But for the fight itself, I'd say it was pretty cool. I think it was a very cerebral fight in the sense that it wasn't a, traditional Dragon Ball fight where two super strong fast guys are just beating the living shit out of each other. This was more so, hey, this guy blinded me. Hey, this guy doesn't really seem to be the most physically imposing guy, but he's flying in the air while I'm blinded to actually make me use my brain more so than my actual brawn. And hey, after this beam clash between me and Lavenda, I notice he's getting smirky, so I'm gonna try to grab him while he's off guard while I'm actually trying to, slam him into the ground and knock him out. Those were some really interesting elements that we've seen more so in another series I really love in Yu Yu Hakusho, where during the Dark Tournament, it's not necessarily all about who's stronger or faster, but more so whose techniques can outlast each other, or what have you noticed about your opponent. And it was very, very, very well written, so I'd have to give Dragon Ball Super credit there. It wasn't super interesting in the sense that it was something new that we'd never seen before, but it was a very well condensed episode in that element of the fight. But to talk about the other interesting thing I noticed in this episode, it would have to be this mortal life detector that Zeno apparently calculates. Now, based off of what everybody was saying, the way it works is universes 5, 12, 8, and 1 are all exempt from participating in the Tournament of Power because their mortal life detector is over a 7, which means that they have really nice or good mortals in their universe. And universe 7 has a rating of a 3.18, and a universe, 9 has a rating of a 1.86. So they're very, very, very low on the totem pole, if Geekdom's watching this review or listening to this review. And it kind of made me wonder, how the hell does Zeno calculate this? And I thought about it, I said to myself, it makes sense. It can be calculated based off of the effectiveness of the God of Destruction and the Supreme Kais. Why is that? Because if the Supreme Kais create life and expand the universe, and if the Gods of Destruction, restrict the universe and destroy, what needs to be destroyed, that means that they kind of work in unison to perfecting the mortal life. So for example, if we take Universe 7 and Beerus does a good job of eliminating all of the bad mortal life while the Supreme Kai creates more better mortal life, that results in a better universe. So really, the fact that our universes have a low score is really a reflection off of the poor job that both Beerus and the Supreme Kai are doing. That's kind of how I interpreted it, and I felt that that was really cool. But it really sucks, however, that regardless of what happens, Universe 9 is screwed anyways, because they were going to get wiped out, you know, on their own accord, because their score was so poor anyways, and this tournament was pretty much a chance for them to save themselves by winning it in the long run. So I felt that that was really cool how they mix all of these things, you know, into this episode. And I quite honestly think that's kind of weird how they calculated, but regardless or not, that's my interpretation. And I want you guys to let me know what you think in the comment section below of how you interpret how Zeno actually calculates the quality of mortal life apart from what I said. But either way, you know, this episode ended in a draw, and as a fan of Gohan, he's not my favorite character. He used to be at one point. I felt that Gohan kind of redeemed himself. He clearly wasn't at his best. He clearly probably would have beaten Lavenda had he been more active in training. But this was a good sign, as it showed that Gohan is willing to kind of, you know, in a losing position, throw his body away to defeat his opponent. And the best part about it is that Gohan, despite the fact that he was kind of being outclassed in several instances, he used his wit to win this fight. And you see that, you know, he's being motivated to train for this, you know, obviously the main event that's going to take place afterwards. And I felt like that was really a redeeming element towards Gohan. So I want you guys to tell me in the comment section below for our key discussion today, are you guys satisfied with Gohan's fight in this episode? Quite honestly, even though he didn't win, I think he did his job, and now his universe is pretty much 1.5 points up on Universe 9. So overall, when you're looking at this episode, I'd probably have to give this episode 4 stars. It wasn't amazing, it wasn't transcendent, it didn't blow me away, but I think it did a pretty good job, and I think it deserves a pat on the back. I felt the animation was pretty solid. I felt Gohan redeemed himself, and I also feel that most importantly, they added a different element towards the fights. As we saw in the previous episode between Majin Buu and Basil, that was more of a classic beat 'em up, who's stronger fight between, you know, Dragon Ball characters. And because of Majin Buu's ability to regenerate alongside his, you know, obviously very powerful, you know, abilities, he was able to dominate Basil. But this was more so of a fight where you see Gohan using all of his abilities to the maximum extent to win a fight. And I feel like Dragon Ball Super definitely needs some credit for that. I'm going to give this episode a solid 4 stars. And as for my predictions for episode 81, I kind of already know what's going to happen because of, you know, spoilers that always come out. But, you know, from what we see in it, it definitely seems like we're seeing a nod taking place back to Dragon Ball, in which Goku was fighting against Piccolo in his giant form, as we see Goku like super tiny fighting against Bergamo. And as we saw in the preview, we saw Goku fighting in nothing but his base form, which tells us that if Goku's only in his base form, this is going to be a dragged out fight where Goku's going to hold off his full abilities, and he might not even use his full abilities until he absolutely necessarily needs it, because of the fact that this exhibition match really doesn't play a role into how anything's going to be, you know, taken into account of the full tournament itself, because it's just a preliminary match. And even, you know, the Grand Priest himself mentions this. So it's not going to be an important fight, but it's going to be an interesting fight, and I think that it's going to motivate Universe 7 to fight even harder, considering that their universe was on the chopping block of being destroyed anyways. But with everything else said, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I enjoyed this episode. I think it did a good job, and to tell you guys the truth, I don't really have a lot of criticisms of Dragon Ball Super, you know, as of the last few episodes, I think it's been pretty good. And I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. So with everything else said, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.